See, when good people do nothing, the other problem is then evil triumphs. Evilness, sin, sinful people have to be opposed. That God commands those who are good not to just avoid evil, but to actively oppose it. Take a look at Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, and in verse 11. And do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. That's one of our jobs. Not just to sit on the sideline and say, well, at least I'm not doing those things. Somebody has to stand up and say, that's wrong. That's not right. You ought not to be doing that. Here's why. Those who do nothing about sin and evil, well, in the end, you help evil and sin exist. You allow it to prevail. Over in Ezekiel chapter 3, there was Ezekiel was given this warning, and it applies, I think, to every leader in the churches, among Christians. It applies to all of us. In Ezekiel chapter 3 and in verse 18. Actually, we'll start with verse 17. Son of man, I have appointed you a watchman over the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you do not warn him, or speak out to warn the wicked from his wicked way, that he may live, that wicked man shall surely die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. When you see people doing wrong, and you don't say anything, God holds you accountable. In fact, if you keep reading this thing, it says that the wicked person still remains in his sin, even if you do give them the warning. But that's not what God's interested in. He's expecting people to say this is wrong. Now, a righteous man, when he receives a warning, will change. But again, if you don't give him warning, he won't have the warning to change by. And God still requires it at your hand. In fact, one of the famous challenges is back in 1 Kings chapter 18. Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal and Asherah. He challenges them to see who is the true God, and very, very dramatically proves that it is God alone who exists. But in issuing that challenge, he calls to the people in verse 21 of 1 Kings chapter 18. 1 Kings 18, verse 21. And I want you to notice something. He calls to the people and says, and Elijah came near to all the people and said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer a word. They wouldn't take sides. They did nothing. Think about the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's in Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 31 roughly. In that parable of the Good Samaritan, a wicked man robbed and beat a man, leaving him half dead. We have no trouble saying the men who did this were evil, they were wicked. But what makes this story stand out is because a priest and a Levite walk by. And seeing the man beaten on the side of the road, they walked on the other side and continued on. In Luke chapter 10, in verse 31, and by chance a certain priest was coming down on the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite also, when he came to the place, saw him and passed by on the other side. They were willing to let evil triumph by doing nothing. People that ought to have known better. Only the Samaritan stood up for what was right. He did something about the problem. See, in the fight between evil and good, there is no middle ground. There's no gray area. There's no neutrality. In fact, take a look at Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, and in verse 30, Matthew 12, verse 30, it says, "He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters." We don't work with Christ, we're opposing him. Everyone who does nothing is opposing Christ. Because only those who work with him are with him. The fact of the matter is, when good men do nothing, then they are not good. Too many have the mistaken notion that good merely means the absence of doing what's wrong. A person is not good merely because he's done no evil. A good person is one who's actively doing what is good. Take a look at 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. And in verse 11 it says, "And let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it." It's not merely not doing wrong. It's actively pursuing what is right. In fact, James puts it this way in James chapter 4 and verse 17. James chapter 4, verse 17, "Therefore to the one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, then it is sin." We have to do what is right. Not merely not do wrong. In that scripture reading, we had the story about Joseph being thrown into the pit. Reuben, the oldest of the Israel's sons, knew his brother's plot back in Genesis 37. The murder of Joseph was wrong. Reuben knew he was responsible, being the eldest brother. And he knew what the brothers were planning was wrong. He tried to attempt a rescue of Joseph. But while he delayed, his brothers sold Joseph off into slavery. And when Reuben found out what happened, he realized that what his inaction helped to bring about. Instead of correcting his error, Reuben covered his guilt by agreeing with his brothers to lie about Joseph's disappearance. Look at Genesis chapter 37 and verse 29. "Now Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. So he tore his garments, and he returned to his brother and said, 'The boy is not there. For as for me, where am I to go?' So they took Joseph's tunic, and they slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the tunic in the blood. And they sent the varicolored tunic and brought it to their father, and said, We have found this. Please examine it and see whether it is your son's tunic or not.